a level crossing in Japan on the older at ground level rail system. This is actually the longest level crossing in Japan. This rail level crossings has to come up with another solution. So if we go to the other side of Tokyo, to a place called Daishin Konan, and their railway station, and come down to ground level, we can see here an elevated railway, and the next video shows what it used to look like. Historic video was located, and we can see that there are actually two elevated railway tracks running across where there used to be a level crossing. So let's go back to the historic video showing the transition from the old level crossing at ground level to the elevated railways. So we now see the elevated railway above. Ground level view as it is now, we can see there are two tracks for the trains instead of one at ground level, and pedestrian crossover, a park and drop position, and another pedestrian crossover. So grade separation of vehicles and pedestrians is a major feature which can be done in large cities. Let's move from Japan to New York City, which I had the pleasure of visiting for a week on one occasion, and stayed on Manhattan Island, just up at upper Manhattan. There are 5 boroughs in the city of New York that have come together to create one larger government authority called this New York City. Staten Island, Brooklyn, which actually is Kings County, the borough of Queens, the borough of Bronx, and then the island of Manhattan. If we go to a particularly interesting part of New York City called Columbus Circle. Columbus Circle is at the junction of 5 roads. This is 8th Avenue, which runs through here, and at this point is called Central Park West. In New York City they often rename sections of roads in local regions. This road here is an old military road from when the Dutch owned Manhattan Island, and it was a road which ran from the fort down at the Bowery at Lower Manhattan up to the other end of Manhattan Islands, and it's called Broadway. Just the top here, Broadway runs into the grid that was created at 9th Avenue, so that the grid was superimposed on top of existing roads, and Broadway is one of the original roads prior to the grid, which was created in 1811. At this point here, the elevated railways which existed in New York City have been moved underground, and the railway lines which run under this section of road are now called the 8th Avenue trains, even though they don't run. There are similar 8th Avenues in Brooklyn and other parts of New York City, but the name is referring to 8th Avenue in Manhattan. The A, B, C and D trains run along this section of track, and under this section of road the 1, 2 and 3 trains run. Lower Manhattan at the Bowery, a wide street that runs into 3rd Avenue, at an earlier time showing 3 tracks of tram lines, and the central slot indicates that these are cable trams, and above we have 2 tracks of elevated railway lines with steam trains running on the railway lines. And there's no station along this section of the Bowery for the steam trains. We're actually about to cross over the Brooklyn Bridge, which is behind where the photographer is standing. System in operation in earlier time. On this side we have the up train, which is a local train, and its platform. Then above it is the platform for up express trains. On the other side of that single track is the down platform for the express trains when they're running in the opposite direction on the single track, and then hidden behind on a lower level there's another platform for the down local trains. This kind of two-tier system was implemented because of the fact that the private railway companies had to work within the narrow confines of the width of the roadway and still enable other users to use the roadway. So at the lower level we have cars, and we can see here there actually are tram tracks as well. This probably is somewhere near where the Columbus Circle system now functions, and these railway lines now run underneath the road, a Broadway, and these tram tracks have been removed. This is the track diagram for New York subway system on Manhattan Island, where they're basically in this section all underground, further else they are above ground. This is the Columbus Circle section of Manhattan's underground train system. Elsewhere in New York City the subway system is above ground. So the blue line here is the 8th Avenue trains, and the red are the 9th Avenue trains. At this point they're running along the road called Broadway. And this is the Columbus Circle station, which in fact is on two different levels beneath the roadway of 8th Avenue and Columbus Street, sorry. We can see that a bit further along at Lincoln Center there are only two platforms, and the one train stops here, but the 2 and 3 trains don't stop. At the next point at 72nd Street, the 1, 2 and 3 trains all stop because there are 4 platforms, and then at 79th Street again we have only 2 platforms and only the 1 train stops. Just across the way on 8th Avenue, just by the museum, we can see that the B and C train stop here, but the A train and the D trains, which stop back at Columbus Circle, don't stop on this section of the track underneath 8th Avenue. Of Columbus Circle station. This is 8th Avenue, sometimes called Central Park Avenue, Central Park West at this point of the roadway. This is Central Park, and this is Broadway, the diagonal road which runs across Manhattan and runs into 9th Avenue. So the 9th Avenue trains run underneath. This is the 9th Avenue trains, and the 8th Avenue trains are beneath them. The feature about the 9th Avenue trains is whilst there are 4 tracks passing through this section, there are only 2 platforms, and whilst there are the 1, the 2 and the 3 trains running on that line, only the number 1 trains stop at this station. Lower down, the 8th Avenue platforms, there are 4. The A and D trains are express trains, in other words they are limited stop trains, and A and D do not stop at Museum Station further along 8th Avenue, whereas the B and C trains are local trains, although they stop at every station. This video shows the third track system in operation at 46th Street. We can see that there are 2 platforms but 3 tracks. In a moment we're going to see an express train going down the central track and not stopping at this station. The distinctive feature of New York Metropolitan Authority trains are they have 10 carriages as standard. The express train passing through the station, and now we have a local train stopping at the station. There are a number of places in the New York City where there are 3 tracks but only 2 platforms. Public transport system is the customer, and giving information to the customer which they can understand. In New York City MTA, Metropolitan Transport Authority, which runs the buses and the railway system, there's a connection between the various railway connections and the buses, and we use these symbols so that black circles indicate that the trains or buses are local buses. In other words, they stop at every stop in that region, and express trains, express buses don't stop at that position. Or if it's white, it means that all buses or trains, express and local, all stop at that position. So this is the point where people who want to travel across town will get off their express train or catch an express train and transfer to a local bus or train. The ticketing allows sometimes transfer between buses and trains with free transfer between various services, and sometimes you can walk out into the street and get connections between them as well. So this is New York City subway and mass transit system. And we've been looking at Manhattan, in particular that section of Manhattan around Columbus Circle. So this is Columbus Circle. And we can see that Columbus Circle, the A and C trains on the 8th Avenue line. Then you've got the B and D coming into Columbus Circle, and the 1, 2, 3. The other thing to notice is that Central Park, which was created in 1850 when the city of New York City decided to compulsorily acquire all of this farmland, because at that time this is all farmland, to create an open space 15,000 people who lived in this area were evicted from the land to create Central Park. In today's world, there are actually a number of subway lines which run underneath Central Park. So we can see here. The other thing also over here, you can see that there are roadways which run across Central Park, but they're actually in cuttings, so that when you stand in Central Park and look across, you can't see the cars and buses travelling through. And when we were in New York City at that time, we actually travelled from the Museum of Metropolitan Art on a bus on the 79th Transit to the Natural History Museum Street, and we're actually above 4 tracks of railway line. 2 tracks on the upper level are running north, which is going in the direction behind us, and the lower tracks are running south, the way we're facing. On the left hand side is the 79th Street transverse, where the cutting through the park carries buses to here, and on the right we can see the entrance to the subway. If we move down this road, not very far, we come to the very famous Natural History Museum, where thousands of people every day come using buses and subways to visit this fantastic museum, the Museum of Natural History. 4-track double-height subway tunnel being constructed in New York City. Let's now leave New York City and come to South Australia, to Greater Adelaide. Greater Adelaide actually is slightly larger than New York City in terms of area, and all these lines on the screen at the moment are showing the level crossings on the Salisbury line, on the Gawler line, of which Salisbury station is an example of a very busy railway station in South Australia on the Gawler line. And we descend down now to look at the Gawler level crossing. So we can see here 3 tracks of line. The line directly in front of us is actually a freight train line, which has got a different ownership to these 2 other tracks here, which are the Adelaide Metro commuter train lines, and this is showing the level crossing. With a busy Salisbury Highway in the background and a complex of other roads feeding into the area around this level crossing. What we'll do now is look at trains travelling on the commuter Gawler line. in Adelaide, South Australia. This is the Hills line, 2 tracks. One track on the eastern side is for the trains from Belair to Adelaide, which carry diesel electric trains for commuters, and the western track is the ARTC owned track for intercity passenger trains and freight trains. This is the 2 tracks of electric trains for the Tonsley line and for the Seaford line. This is the junction where the freight train line, which is on the western side, crosses over at a junction with the Tonsley line, which meant that the conflict occurred between freight trains and passenger trains in the morning rush hours and the afternoon rush hours. The Goodwood overpass with a heavy freight train just going over a level crossing. Ideally this should be a double track, an up, down, and down track, but at the moment it's only a single track. The Belair line, the commuter train, is also only a single track, so the Hills line really should be 4 tracks, not 2. From Goodwood Station towards the Adelaide Showground Station, then to the Keswick ARTC marshalling yards. Whilst this train is going through, there's actually a pedestrian underpass which commuters could use. Pedestrian underpass. Meanwhile, no trams have gone overhead. Standing room only in the train. Almost chockers. If there were 6 carriages on the train, then there'd be more room. The Blair Line train is now going over the Goodwood Junction rail underpass. The line to the Adelaide Hills The line to the Adelaide Hills is now called the Blair Line because that's as far as the commuter trains travel. Is a single track. The other track is a different gauge and is used by freight trains. Even though this is a logical interchange station, people wanting to go from the southern to the hills, not all trains stop here. So it obviously cannot function as interchange stations if the trains don't stop. Again, another train not stopping at the station, which means it cannot function as an interchange station. It's a Seaford train. People wanting to use the trams and the trains can catch a tram at stop 4 on Lee Street, Borisville, or Railway Terrace, Goodwood, stop 3. Stop 4, Borisville tram stop. At the level crossing on Norman Terrace and Lee Street. The up tram has just crossed over the tram bridge over South Road and is coming to the Forestville station.
I don't know if the ticket will work. So here you go.
Trains just coming into the station. This is the track diagram for the Adelaide Metro trams and trains, and we're looking at the Blair line. This is Blair Station. You can see that there's a single platform and a single track. It moves through to 2 more stations with single platforms and single track. At Blackwood there's a double track. This means that down trains and up trains can meet at the Blackwood station at the same time and pass one another. If one of these trains is late, then both trains are late because the trains can't move forward until both trains are at Blackwood station. Moving further down towards the city, after Coromandel, there's no passing loop at Coromandel, but there's a passing loop between the stations. If there's any delays and the train needs to wait or the other train to come to the passing loop, the passengers sit in the train twiddling their thumbs, wondering why the train's just stopped in the middle of nowhere. At Eden Hills, there's a single platform again, then a passing loop between Eden Hills and Linton. Again, this will be a place where passengers will be twiddling their thumbs, waiting for the trains to come. Coming down this section is a very steep descent to down what's called Sleep's Hill, named after a man called Sleep, and Torrens Park. And at Mitcham Station there are two platforms and a passing loop. Unley Park, this is the point where Crossroads, part of the outer ring route, crosses over the road. Then there's a passing loop at Millswood. The station at Millswood is no longer functioning, so it's not shown on the map here. We then come to a point where the Blair line goes over the top of the Seaford line and then goes underneath the tram overpass. The trams used to be a railway line and got turned into tram line in the 1920s. At this station, Goodwood Station, there are 3 tracks of the metro train system with 3 platforms, an island platform and a side platform here. At this point, there should be identification that the Forestville station on the tram system is something the commuters might want to transfer to get to points in this direction or in that direction. Also at Goodwood Station, if they wanted to go to Tonsley line to the future development of the Flinders Medical Centre and Flinders University line, or if they wanted to go south, Goodwood Station is a place where train transfers should be occurring between trains and trains, and trains and trams, and similarly trams transferring onto trains wanting to get to places in the hills and so on. After Goodwood, we come to the Adelaide Showgrounds station, which has been rebuilt and very, very elaborate and great. This is just near Anzac Highway, which is a major bus route. There is an island platform and a side platform, 3 tracks and 3 platforms. We then go under Anzac Highway to Mile End, where there are now 4 tracks and 4 platforms. Then underneath the tram line at Port Road, there's a Port Road extension of the tramway system from West Terrace and the new Royal Adelaide Hospital, and then round to Adelaide Railway Station. Looking at the Seaford line, this section was rebuilt with a very successful sets of rail overpasses so that traffic on the roads is not interfered by the movement of trains in this section. The Seaford station has the potential for 2 platforms, but at the moment, because it's the terminus one, the only platform that's used is the western platform. We then have the Seaford Downs depot, because this is where the trains have been shifted to at night and are stored at this point. They're ready for the morning run into the city. Noarlunga is 2 platforms. And the problem with this particular set of platforms, and also these platforms, is they're not long enough to take more than 2 or 3 carriages. as we've seen in places like New York City, the trains in the daytime have 10 carriages. In the case of the Shinkansens in China, as in Japan, the carriages in the middle of the early morning are 8 carriages, and then later in the day there's 16 carriages. In Melbourne they are standardising on 7 carriages. In Sydney it's 8 carriages, and in Perth it's 6 carriages. In Adelaide, most of these stations along here can only accommodate 2 or 3 carriages. At Port Stanvac there used to be a railway line to an oil refinery, which is no longer there. And we can see that at Brighton there's a passing loop structure, because this used to be the end of the line before the extensions were made. We come to Oaklands. This station is going to be moved into a cutting and made longer so that it can accommodate 6 carriage trains. We come then to Woodlands. Woodlands should be a station where passengers are informed that they should change trains, so trains should stop there all of the time, just as trains should stop all of the time here at Goodwood or Adelaide Showgrounds, so that transfers between trains can occur. This is the current Tonsley line. You can see it's a single track. It only becomes a double track at this point through there. So the question then is, why aren't we making more noise and information to the public that trains at Woodlands Park are a point where you can change trains, and similarly at Goodwood and the Adelaide Showgrounds are stations where transfers between trams and trains and various lines can occur. If we look at the Belair line, we can see that the average speed on the Belair line is 31 for all stops and 33 for express travelling. And on the Seaford line, we can see that the Seaford with all stops goes at 41 kilometres an hour, and with express goes to 55. So if we look at the Seaford timetable, we can see that going from Seaford in the morning between 7 and 8 o'clock we can get 8 trains on the Seaford line, and these circles are showing where trains would be at 8 o'clock on the system. So we can see that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 and potentially 9 trains are needed to run this service. We can see that the train which left at 7:14, train number 2, does not stop at Woodlands. Similarly, this train number 6, which left at 7:44, doesn't stop at Woodlands. Woodlands is a point where people who work at Flinders University or study there would want to transfer to get to Tonsley and the extension. Or similarly here at the Goodwood station, the 7:14, that train number 2 doesn't stop there, or at the showgrounds. Similarly, train number 6 doesn't stop there. So the current pattern of travel on the Seaford line does not facilitate transfer between trains and transfer between trains and trams. This is the timetable for the Belair line. Between 7 and 8 on the Belair line we've got 4 trains, and we can see that all of the Belair line trains stop at Goodwood and they all stop at Adelaide Showgrounds, so they can facilitate transfer to trams
at this point. And to run this service, they're using 1, 2, 3, 4 trains are needed to do the up service, the service from the Belair to Adelaide.
Train overpass. Skate park. A swimming pool. And the entrance to a pedestrian and bike underpass underneath the railway lines. Go to railway station. Bulla in Victoria, and the road to Keswick in Adelaide is 392 kilometres, and Whereas estimates would take 4.5 hours to drive that distance, which is an average speed of 87 kilometres an hour. If we go to the Australian Rail Track Corporation's website, it's possible to see the freight train timetable, and at this point, number 300 is the Dimboola to Adelaide timetable, and this is that timetable. We can see two things about the timetable. That is that at 5:30 AM on a Wednesday, train 3MP7 leaves Dimboola and passes through the Mount Lofty Ranges from Belair and gets to Keswick at 10:02, and at this point it's passing the Goodwood station. That is a distance probably the same as the road of 390 kilometres, and it's taking 4.5 hours to do. So in fact the train is also travelling at an average speed of 87 kilometres an hour. So this is a very efficient way of getting all that freight from Dimboola to Adelaide, and each of those carriages on the train, which is 1.8 kilometres long, is a B double. So some hundreds of B doubles are taken off the road by that single train. The other thing to notice is that the trains through Adelaide metropolitan area, this is Wednesday, Thursday and Friday, are all passing through Adelaide in the early morning. So this is arriving at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the morning, 8 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 1 past midnight in the morning. The reason is they can't, because these trains are going from Melbourne to Perth basically non-stop, the trains cannot negotiate the next junction, the Torrens junction, because of the fact that the very busy outer harbour line and range lines cross over the ARCT track, and so the trains on the freight system are rescheduled to avoid the freight, to avoid the conflict, the congestion at the Torrens Junction. This means that the system can only work basically at night time. It can't work during the day. And so the building of these flyovers at Goodwood Junction and Torrens Junction is a great reducing of inefficiencies and congestion. It saves energy if these junctions are built and trains can move all through the day and not just at night time.
The state government of South Australia sold the country rail system to the Commonwealth Government, and eventually this ended up in the hands of the Australian Rail Track Corporation. This line through the Adelaide Hills has got a number of tunnels, some kilometres of tunnels, which are single bore, except for the section from Belair down where there are two bores, or a tunnel which at this point, the Sleep Hill Tunnel, the second version of the Sleep Hill Tunnel, is a dual track. This is Mount Barker Junction and the township of Mount Barker. With the rapid expansion of this suburban area, there's a need for fast transit to the city. There's also the problem that the freight trains from around about this point are confronted by very narrow curves which are such that the trains can't negotiate the tracks very quick at a very high speed, and the noise of the wheels on the trains is a disturbance to the neighbours, and often there are sparks coming from the trains which cause bushfires which go through the hills. So the people of the Adelaide Hills are very keen that this single track be converted into a commuter train so people can move from Mount Barker and surrounding areas to the city and to other parts of the Adelaide Hills. A proposal is that just past Murray Bridge that a rail bypass be built for rail and also for trucks to join onto the Keswick to Port Augusta line at Malala. The trains could then come back into Adelaide either via Salisbury or via the proposed Northern Connector railway line. The amount of energy needed to climb over these hills is a great expense compared to the saving if the trains were to use this faster, more direct bypass. Passenger trains between Adelaide and Perth and Adelaide and Melbourne could come round this way as well and still get into the Keswick Parkland station, or this station could be relocated away from the central part of the city, such as was happened in Vancouver in British Columbia, Canada, where the passenger trains no longer start in the centre of British Vancouver but start on the outskirts of the city. The people of the Adelaide Hills are petitioning the various federal and state governments for the relocation of the train lines. And this is a newspaper showing that the local government authorities, such as the Mitcham Council and the Morelands local government authorities, are all expending money to do further studies and lobbying for the relocation and rerouting of the ARTC trains around via this bypass. And then back into Adelaide.